Next up in our map analysis series, we've got Death Toll, which happens to be my favorite map. Death Toll is the second original Left 4 Dead 1 campaign alongside No Mercy, Dead Air, and Blood Harvest, and as a result is the first campaign that people saw after flying away in the No Mercy helicopter. This established to players at the time that the story took a backseat to the gameplay. So as per usual, we're going to break down the 5 chapters in the same fashion we have been for No Mercy and Crash Course, and then afterwards I'll talk a bit about why Death Toll happens to be one of my favorites, as well as a brief announcement regarding my projected release schedule. But first, Discord regular, a Gus Boy, was on his way to his date with Handsome Dan's Decayed Jockey mod when Schmorgus messed up a jump, falling down and crashing on top of a Gus Boy. Subscribe to the channel to help support them as they recover in the hospital. Thank you. Very beginning of chapter 1, after the camera does its movement, you can turn around and see the Crash Course truck. So this does add some storyline continuity, but this is only in Left 4 Dead 2 from the Last Stand update, and to this day is still not there in Left 4 Dead 1. For the first stretch of trees, if you've watched my videos before, then you know my golden rule here, which is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, in which you move forward to aggro the infected and then kite backwards. This methodical approach will help reduce, if not outright eliminate, the threat of infected flanking from behind you, keeping them in front of you despite spawning out of sight in the trees. The cars will also help provide a temporary high ground if that's important to you. At this bridge is the first trick of the chapter, trading just under 20 health in order to jump from one side to the other. This can be done on both sides, which certainly helps with time and can skip a lot of idle spawns, putting them behind you. Especially in perhaps a public lobby, you still want to make sure that you aren't leaving your teammates vulnerable, and I'd still recommend hanging out around the dip to make sure that you can cover your team to some degree. Technically speaking, you can also use the downhill momentum of bunny hopping to do a single hop and grab the dip of the bridge. Just a heads up that the bridge, at the very tip of the road portion here, cannot be stood on and you will slide down by design. A side note, it's interesting how Valve made downhills back here. You'll see it's actually multiple blocks, but then there's a hill that's placed over top of it. There are many instances of this in Death Toll. If you're going down traditionally, it can be a bit awkward. Aside from the terrain, it is still quite spread out, so it can be easy to get swarmed or take random ticks of damage if you move forward too recklessly. And there's also usually a melee spawn by the bottom of the ladder right here. When you approach this valley, the right side of the bridge isn't obscured by trees, so basically every playthrough goes down the right side here. But in case you didn't know, your team also can go down the left side as there is a ladder here as well. Also, there's a ton of dead space here. It helps add to the overall look and feel of this chapter, so it's cool, but just a heads up that if you ever do decide to walk all the way over here, nothing ever spawns. Depending on early horde timing, climbing up the ladders can be a little awkward. I often find that when a horde spawns around the ladder, players instinctively want to get the high ground, but when commons are also spawning from above you on the ladder, it can get claustrophobic, especially because the areas themselves are quite small. You especially don't want to be climbing up and finding yourself face to face with a charger or jockey, for example. There are opportunities to cover your teammates from high ground once you do have that, since the horde doesn't always try to pinch you from higher up, but I also want to put the valleys on your radar as an area to kite back to. I feel like there's a solid 50% chance I'll see a smoker in these trees off to the left after the ladder. Entering this tunnel honestly simplifies things because for the most part, the infected can only come from 2 potential directions, in front or behind. There are 5 spots in this tunnel to check for items, and they're all easy to check without going too out of your way. The first is this pocket on the left. The second is this little hallway with the respawn closet. The third is this first pocket on the right, and this is a big one. And the fourth is this right pocket afterwards, and this is the most important one in my opinion because of the high throwable and temporary health rates, as well as propane and gas cans. And the last is this pocket on the right after you jump over the cars. When navigating this tunnel, I think it's reasonable to skip the left hallway in a lot of cases. I personally am the type of player to like to check many corners, not even just for items, but to eliminate potential infected flanks. But if you stay to the right, you have a great view of that choke point from the second right pocket, which is the most important one to check after all. Plus, with a great chance at throwables or even things like propane and gas cans, you're able to then use it for a horde immediately, which of course goes a long way in such a linear room, especially fire. The hole in the ceiling is exclusive to Left 4 Dead 2 and was not there in Left 4 Dead 1. Also, it's funny because if you do look up into this room, it doesn't actually go anywhere. Whether in the left corridor or the tunnel as a whole, of course it makes sense to have a sort of 2-on-2 holdout going on. Ultimately, while staying really packed as a team is beneficial, if you can push out a bit while keeping yourselves in view of each other, then it's even better because you can then push back up closer to each other if you really need to kite back for a little bit before pushing back out again. This helps with alleviating the overall pressure your team can feel. Because of this unique mix of outdoors and indoors, while weapon choices in this game are genuinely not the most important, running a 2 SMG and 2 shotgun loadout fits perfectly with this first stretch of the game. I like this car pile up here. It's cool to be able to sort of jump up and get a bit of a high ground to look ahead before moving forward. I think this potential hull flank is really cool as well. I wouldn't really worry about being flanked from the ceiling, it's quite rare. Even a smoker attack doesn't really take you out of view of your teammates here, but if you are concerned about a potential ceiling flank, you can always just hug the walls. Also, it's funny again that this room up here just doesn't actually do anything and doesn't go anywhere. Not really much to say about this spiral staircase. The only special infected I'd be specifically concerned about here is a spitter because it's common for a spit pool to split people up out of sight of each other, which of course you never want. Of course, when advancing forward here, I think it's best to check this room, not just for the single spawn deagle, but because if you peek out from the center door, you have to look left and right to check your corners, but if you go out of this door, then you only have to look right. So this room is a nice pipe bomb opportunity if you happen to have one because it will flush out infected from underneath you. This room can kind of annoy me sometimes because there are 3 whole directions to check and a lot of great things can spawn here like bile jars, defibs, ammo, pain pills, and especially in public lobbies, it isn't uncommon for people to get split up between checking the rooms and wanting to skip it all and advance forward. Neither approach is wrong, let's make that part clear, but if you want to advance forward and your team wants to check rooms, don't push up to the top of the stairs because if something happens to you, then it'll take time for people to come up and reach you. It's best to stay by the ladder. If your team wants to move forward and you want to check the rooms, then only check one and move on. In my ideal perfect world, you'd have a best of both worlds where you have one person check the left room, one person check the right, one person check underneath, and one person just overseeing the front entrance while the doors are all closed behind. This room has multiple good fire opportunities, by the way, as well, should a horde spawn while you have a fire source. What's interesting is that you can't scale up these little vents from the ground, but you can jump across them like so in Left 4 Dead 2. But for some reason, you can only jump across them like this in the first title. Breaking out up the stairs, there's actually a neat little trick here where you can get onto this dumpster and up onto the fence. This eventually leads you to the top of this rock, which will give you an unobscured view of this clearing, whereas if you progress normally, the rock on the right can obscure vision. There's also this little dead space here with the extensive foliage enabling common effective flanks during horde spawns, but I never see any items spawn back here. I think this area clearing is also a good pipe bomb opportunity. Once up the clearing to the safe house, if you keep going up the stairs, you will see an optional room, which usually has at least one throwable or temporary health item. Sometimes nothing, but I like this room a lot, and it's pretty crazy how it's in plain sight, but I still hear people mention that they don't know it exists. I usually find that it's common for me to start juggling items down these stairs here because teammates either don't know or don't care. A couple quick facts about this final area is that when you navigate up the hill by the safe house, you can sort of walk across to get this unique perspective of the valley clearing beneath you. There's also this little parkour opportunity here by the safe house. Also, you could choose to keep walking towards the chain link fence if you happen to want to take random free ticks of damage. In the upper room, there's also another crazy parkour opportunity by utilizing the shelves. It doesn't really fulfill any specific need, but it is possible to traverse through this window up here if you feel like it. During a horde, a good Molotov placement behind you would be one here, which blocks off both sides of the chain link fence, or up here at the top of the hill by this fence. Well, overall, a pretty solid chapter. Of course, it kind of comes down to where would I try to incorporate alternate paths so that the campaign feels a bit more fresh with subsequent playthroughs. In the beginning, perhaps some sort of truck or van placement to negotiate survivors to go down the left side, since the right side is so prominent in the majority of playthroughs. Between the 2 entrances to the hill, plus the 2 ladders, there's room to play around with where the survivors would need to go. Sometimes it's all wide open, other times all left or right side, other times the path could sort of bend here. I don't think I'd address this bridge jump. I think just leave it in there either way for sure. This dynamic specifically could have significant ramifications on verses, so maybe don't implement it there. Once inside the tunnel, you could more or less randomize car placements, maybe even place an alarm car. Perhaps sometimes a vehicle could force survivors to have to go through this left tunnel. I would not complain if I had the occasional tank fight here though. If it spawned in the tunnel, then kiting back amongst the punchable cars could be pretty fun. If it spawned in the final area, then I think kiting it into this little buff room could be pretty fun given its geometry. What if sometimes a safe house door was beneath like a hatch? Like theoretically, let's say if this safe house door wasn't present, but was instead up the stairs and then you jumped down a hatch, and then that's how you transition into the next chapter? Like not even just here specifically, but just in general, I think that'd be a cool idea. It would make sense too for there to be just some sort of big trapdoor looking thing where you spin the wheel to unlock and lock from both ends. Before I start chapter 2, I'll just put these graphics on the screen because it's a YouTube video and I know you know what they mean. So yeah, anyways. Chapter 2 is the drains, which to be honest is one of my favorite chapters. I just think the drains portion is just very well designed while also being very cool, which we'll look more into. There isn't any graffiti in this safe house other than Exodus 9:15. But you can see that there is this map here that actually shows the survivors where the next safe house is. This opening room, I believe, is a good pipe bomb room should you have one, but not fantastic when you realize that you can just aggro then lead them back to the safe house choke point. Which, by the way, I gotta say, I love the little platforming opportunities the safe house has. It's very neat. So majority of the time I go right, so I'll examine straight ahead first. Off to the left is sometimes a propane tank if that's important to you for some reason. When you go down in the pipe here, this jump is possible with an adrenaline shot. I believe it's also possible without adrenaline. Though if it is, it's very specific and might be done through B-hopping. Common boosts are also technically possible here. You can also technically loop around this hole here. It's some pretty unique geometry. While this route ahead is a bit more straightforward, you do run the risk of not having a high ground advantage, and there are some blind spots, including above you and directly underneath the weapon spawns. Whereas if you go to the right side, you will eventually get this high ground advantage where you can do something about any idle zombies that spawn in this pool underneath. But it's all good, at least you get this early respawn closet, which I think is a bit too early, but it's all good. When you go right, there is the ceiling flank opportunity, which I think is a little creative. Here's what the area looks like. When you drop down from this ledge, it may seem like a one-way at first, but so long as you aren't limping, you are able to jump back up by using this railing. Should you get a fairly earlier tank spawn, this little ring is a great spot to kite tanks around in. It's also probably your only real consistently good option in this area too, since you don't have potential water slowing you down, and you've got great visibility on him the entire time that you do, and geometry that you can use to dodge rocks with. Also, I accidentally found out that if you stand underneath these water sources under here, you can kind of blind yourself because of the high ground advantage, and due to the less time you spend in penalty water. Going to the right just always feels like the obvious way to go about the opening of this chapter. Once headed down, you also get a taste of some tier 2 weapons, which are normally not assault rifles, as the assault rifle will spawn ahead. This penalty water here is pretty cheeky though, because sometimes you might find yourself along here trying to run away from a tank or witch, and this water can throw a wrench into those plans. Up this hill, we've got another respawn closet, and it's funny how close this is to the first closet. In fact, it's funny how close all three of these closets are. The thing is, this closet is worth a check anyway, since it's not uncommon for throwables and temporary health items to spawn in here, which are of course going to be helpful for the upcoming event. When peeking into this room, I'm pretty neutral to it as a pipe bomb room, mainly because you can just hop off and stay on the ground to the right, avoiding penalty water, and you can pretty quickly get to the ladder. Infected climbing up often have to take a little bit of extra time climbing up out of the water. Pretty normal to be able to just run right, then use the ladder as your high ground to fend off the idols that have aggroed to you. Should a tank spawn in here, chances are you're running all the way back up the ladder and kiting the tank around the big donut. Trying to do this in this single ramp with water beneath you is a bit too claustrophobic, and you'll have to keep doing tight turns consistently to keep it up. Before we start the horde, you can technically jump on top of this button, and then from here you can jump on top of this pipe. There isn't any crazy advantage you gain from this though. As well, this configuration is part of why I like the drains. This entire spawning area enables infected flanks across both this room and the tank kiting area, and it also just thematically makes sense because it's drains. Alright, so for the actual event, it's actually quite similar to the No Mercy rooftop finale. So long as you're on an upper level, it's kind of hard to go wrong. Whether you're holding out by the button, the assault rifle spawn, or a 2 and 2, you're able to leverage high ground and take advantage of infected having to climb up to get you. This means you can also just sit on a ledge and cut off climbing routes entirely, and when you stand on the weapon spawn, you can just keep picking it up to avoid reload animations. Plus, every throwable opportunity, whether it's a pipe bomb, Molotov, or bile jar, are all very easy to use without having to think about it. It also doesn't end there, as once this bridge lowers, you gain access to not just a respawn closet, which could be used to hold out in if you choose, but I believe this corner is the best corner that one could hold out in. You gain a better view down both of the two big drains that the infected usually flush out of, and infected climbing up to the nearby pipe have to do it twice, with the second climb being in full view of the survivors. The chain link fence off to the left also prevents any close by flanks too, with full visibility of the bridge itself, which is another long thin corridor. At this point, you're more than prepared for the event too. Between the assault rifle and sniper, you've got long lines of sight down corridors where infected will have to funnel into, lining up significant collateral opportunities. For shotgun users, they can often find themselves being effective by eyeing nearby ladders and ledges, and once the bridge has lowered, they can stand in these choke points to make sure nothing gets closed. To be honest, I think a proper way to balance this would actually be to make it so that the tier 2 weapons don't spawn until after this event, but I feel like such a change would get a lot of pushback. The Drains holdout is very easy. It's no surprise that it's also one of the easiest gold medals to achieve in survival as well, with players often holding out on either side of the bridge, and even just standing in the center of the bridge to aim down the main drain. Another small factor that helps is once the bridge is lowered, it completely cuts off this part of the room, disabling potential infected flanks, so they're forced to climb up from the side that they spawn from, and since most of the infected spawn from the main drains, it's easy to focus a lot of attention there. In fact, because of this interesting map niche, it's possible to do a holdout down in this corner quite comfortably. Also, funny enough, something is crazy with the bots here because they just wall-banged the crap out of this bridge when I tested it. I didn't see a lot of infected because the bots would just wall-bang them. There are some notable changes in this area from Left 4 Dead's 1 to 2. In Left 4 Dead 1, you can see how much safer this area was. No drain flanks to be had by the button, which is also safely behind a big fence. You can also see that the weapon spawn area was flush against the wall. The drains event is quite easy, and this is even after they've nerfed it. Another thing is, as we've mentioned in the other breakdowns, if you opt to run away from a holdout event backwards into the map, eventually the infected will purely just be funneling into you. Since drains is pretty early into the chapter, there aren't many places to run back to. The first we tried was immediately up the main ladder, which worked out well because all infected from the main room have to climb up, and that singular pathway is easy to body block. It's also right next to the event button, so repositioning to it doesn't take long at all. We also ran a little bit further back to the primary spawns back here, and it also worked out very well. You've got this exceptional line of sight ahead, which infected have to group into, and the shotgun users will have an easy time covering the ledge in front of you and stairs. My only concern is if infected funnel from the spawn drains above, then that's a potential brutal flank that they can take. If you go up the ladder into the tank kiting donut, then this also becomes quite the easy flank because body blocking the ladder is very easy and the pathways are narrow, so there's a lot of collaterals to be had. It is possible to take this a step further and jump back all the way to guarantee a high ground. When moving forward and opening up this respawn closet for pills, just be mindful of if people still need to respawn or not. Moving forward, I don't have much to comment here about this little double pipe situation. I think it's better to take this more direct line here, but you'll still have to check some corners either way, and the difference is marginal. I'd get comfortable running around these pipes because anytime a tank spawns outside afterwards, chances are you're going to be kiting them back here because there isn't a lot of free space between here and there. In Left 4 Dead 1, it was either one pipe or the other. There wasn't this little midway point connecting the two. There are two ways up here, but I think the most optimal route, again not mandatory or game defining, but most optimal would be to move forwards and check the primary weapon spawns here, then double back up and climb up the ladder. The reason being for this is that it isn't uncommon for there to be some sort of special infected flank outside, which could be tedious to climb up into depending on what's going on. But it'll also naturally make you walk through this room and oftentimes see a throwable in plain sight, not to mention potential respawn closets. This room here is interesting just because there's also this potential ceiling flank that infected can do, commons included, and it just becomes overall safer to enter this room through the doorway rather than climbing up. But again, I stress it's a pretty marginal difference, especially in campaign, which is the lens we're breaking these campaigns down in. Peeking outside lends itself some sneaky flanks because of the trees, but not entirely. This clearing is alright because a normal amount of commons can spawn on the opposite side of the fence, so if they're there, you'll see them out of the way and you can pretty safely advance forward. Well, once you're out here, the decision is yours. If you check the room on the left, it's a fairly common deagle spawn, plus throwables, melees, and temporary health. I always check this room. It's too good to pass up in my opinion, but I get people also wanting to just get to the safe house. I also think it's some really cool map design where you can just look up here and you can see how all these little hallways kind of connect their rooms to each other, even if the survivors themselves can't actually walk in every stretch of it. Finally, once you're in this train room, you can take a gander underneath because sometimes you'll see things like health items, including defibs as well as throwables. It's worth the glance. I also like this very, very big room off to the side here. It just looks so funny from this alternate angle because you're not supposed to be seeing the rest of this room, but yet they still have this door here so that they've got this consistency. And it would be neat if you could scale this ladder here, but it's not a real ladder, just visual. Would be neat to be able to stand on top of this train, but oh well. Within the safe house is graffiti that hints about sneaking up behind them. This, of course, is a reference to being able to melee an infected from behind, killing them immediately. This is, of course, also how you acquire the Spinal Tap achievement in Left 4 Dead 1. And if you haven't seen the movie This is Spinal Tap, you should watch it. It's really funny. Overall, I'd say that this is a fairly easy chapter, but I do like the cool design of the drains specifically. The Drains Holdout event has a lot of easy spots, and a lot of the rooms that I would normally deem as pipe bomb rooms have a lot of very safe alternatives to just kite forwards or back, or to make them funnel underneath you. So if you want to save pipe bombs, this chapter really helps you in that department. Plus, there's just a lot of chokes to utilize your Molotovs in. I'd say the biggest thing to be wary of is if you sometimes get displaced down into the water during the Drains event. If I were to change anything about this chapter, first off, I wouldn't block off one drain or the other to force people down one route. Not in this chapter, although perhaps for the event, probably model it differently so that infected are able to flank underneath the bridge once it is lowered, so maybe it makes it a little bit more challenging, who knows. Such a change might not even affect too much anyways, but I'd make it. I do think there's maybe more opportunity for drain exploration here. Like maybe once you get past the event, perhaps these pipes here sort of snake around to the right, like over top of this respawn closet room, or to the left, and you end up on this ledge for a little bit. And then you could fight through an extra room or two you'd see in sewers anyways, like maybe some overrun security area or something. Maybe that's where your tier 2 weapons spawn. Maybe you're forced to climb up or down the pipes instead. Like you see all these infected flanking opportunities here in this building. It would be cool if maybe sometimes survivors had to navigate their way up as well and break out onto the roof or something and then land on a big truck on their way down, which would be a truck that is blocking the usual route. That could be pretty neat. Although beyond that, I don't have any real recommendations. I don't think this chapter is necessarily lacking in the multiple route department, but I do think that maybe just a little bit more could be added because most of the chapters being indoors, yet not claustrophobic, actually plays into the ease of this chapter a bit. And perhaps that is by design. Again, this was the first campaign after No Mercy when it was originally designed and released, but I do think that there's perhaps some more of the sewer theme to lean into, where you could utilize some more uncomfortable and claustrophobic spaces or more unique geometry granted to you by the pipes. Perhaps make it feel a bit more like a maze, even if it's ultimately one way. But that's all well and good, so let's look at Chapter 3 now. There's a cheeky little tree and train placement here, so you can potentially get sucker punched here from a random common if you don't respect it. You'll notice, however, that there are more trees to the left in Left 4 Dead 2. You can also climb up this car to the left to look at this purely black tunnel, and you can also jump on top of the safe house. So in this open area, you've got some choices, and it can be condensed like this. Auto shotguns on the right, snipers at the top of the tower, and assault rifles near the exit. If you explore off to the left here, you will also see this little hut, which can spawn some pretty good items like defibs, bile jars, chainsaws. If I go through the right side, I don't like to go further than where the shotguns usually spawn, just because this tiny little stretch is dark. When going up the tower, there usually isn't anything in the second floor, but sometimes you'll get a throwable or something. After you've checked the top floor, you can save some time by just hopping over this rail and onto the tank. If you are not interested in checking these nearby spawns, the trains are a good middle ground to hold on top of for general vantage points, and just being the middle piece where your teammates figure it out. There is a lot of dead space off to the left here, which I think only really finds its use when kiting tanks around, but even then, most of the time, you're more than fine using a combination of the trains and tower to kite them around in. I don't view this area as a pipe bomb area. Sure, there are some geometries and trees that idle infected can be creeping in and flank from, but the space is just too big, and not everything will be pulled into it, and you have some high ground spaces to use instead. It's just such a wide area that a lot of idle infected will not actually aggro to you anyways. Once you do get to this area, if you check the bottom floor, more often than not, you're going to find a combination of gas cans and an M60. Sometimes you may also find a defib and sometimes some throwables or temporary health as well. Once up the stairs in this freezer room is where the throwable spawns usually are. There used to be a freezer door here in Left 4 Dead 1, but they removed it going into Left 4 Dead 2, which is notable because tanks cannot break freezer doors down. The room with the assault rifle spawn is important because there's the first respawn closet, but mainly because it's the last room before this transition from wood to train, which is pretty important. There's this hole in the ceiling, and it's not uncommon to have to fight a horde here, so this room will more often than not be a place where you have to fight away from, while having to respect that hole. But as well, about this spot from wood to train, it's important because the lack of railings means if there's any sort of displacement from a smoker, jockey, or charger, then you'll have to find yourself walking all the way around, which is not ideal at all. Sure, you can help out teammates with wall bangs from underneath, but that's not a justification for getting displaced down there to begin with. So this is an important little transition piece here, and it's best to be mindful of your team's readiness as you step over this line. If someone steps over this line to clear infected idly, keep an eye on them, especially on the roof, because a smoker won't need to actually be wrapping them for very long to pull them off. When you do make it over this fence, you can check this little booth here. Usually not worth it, but sometimes you might find temporary health or something. What's also funny is that this happens to be a respawn closet as well, actually. And while not obvious at first, there is this ladder on the side of the train you can use to climb back up should you need. I do look at this stretch of road to be one of the better pipe bomb opportunities for flushing out idols. I'd watch my step around this area just because sometimes you can randomly get caught on ladders when trying to jump down. And as well, you can actually go pretty far into this back corner here and even scale up the cliff a tiny bit for a somewhat decent vantage point if that happens to be important to you for one reason or another. There's also a bit of a cool climbing opportunity here as well. Obviously, because of the trees flanking the road, you're better off staying on the path and minding the golden rule. Of course, at the fork, you'll want to turn left, and it's cool that they have this fiery bus to inadvertently guide you towards the right path, seeing as your eyes immediately fix on the light source contrasting with the nighttime. I have only very rarely decided to venture off onto the right side, but every time I do check over there, it's just dead space. This area also kind of doubles up as a spawning area for infected that want to flank you earlier on by climbing the fences, so it isn't really for survivors anyways. Scaling on top of the bus is advantageous and better than just peeking around for the obvious reasons. What is interesting is if you actually venture off into the trees here, you'll notice that there's fairly good visibility as well as a little bit of a high ground advantage, but still of course a bit risky to be playing around in the trees, especially on realism. Big fan of this toll booth, always got cool things like pills. Just a heads up that one time during a tank battle, wow. Of course the path winds to the left here with more trees on the right. There isn't really anything worth checking out over there. Staying on the road is usually much better, especially if you favor the fence because you can see infected on the other side of the fence and they'd have to climb over the fence in order to flank you anyways. Plus anything like jockeys and smokers can't displace you back into the trees unless they bring you all the way across the street first, which gives your team more seconds to do something about it. As well, should a charger spawn, they're only displacing you against the fence and not all the way back down the road opposite of where you're going. When you checkpoint through this house, you can also check the garage for throwables. Sometimes you'll see bottle jars here. This kitchen also always has 2 gas cans. This bathroom is also a respawn closet, but you'll also notice that it's quite far from the train yard respawn closet, so this whole sketchy tree business can become that much more concerning if you're down numbers. Something interesting about this house is that there isn't really any one particular room that's very safe to hold out in. The kitchen has 3 flanks. The living room has 4 or 5 flanks, depending on how you look at it. So if a horde spawns around this house, I think you're best off trying to establish either the garage, but that's probably a harder one to get everyone on page on. I think backing up into the bathroom and then trying to hold out on the hallways might be one of the better options, but there's flaws with every room. This bedroom also only has 2 chokes to hold out from, but things can get a little claustrophobic. But remember, this kitchen always gives you 2 free gas cans to work with, and it's not necessary to juggle each and every one over to the finale. Also, side note, I love how this house is just perfectly against this cliff here. A lot of trust from the homeowners here to hope nothing falls off of this cliff like a log or something. Also, once upon a time, I downloaded a mod that replaces the paintings in the Blood Harvest finale house with weird Nick Cage photoshops, and that's how I learned that it shares some assets with Death Toll, and I always forget that I have it, so it jump scares me every time. Exiting this house, the trees actually make it a little shaky. You're actually more safe if you go through the bedroom and out onto the street because there's more visibility. There's also a bit of dead space here, but nothing ever spawns. You could also technically push through this window as well, but there are still trees. Big fan of this ambulance. We'll literally come back to this later. It usually feels like a bit of a checkpoint when you're juggling gas cans from the kitchen to the graveyard. Transitioning into the graveyard, fun fact is you can break the tombstones and they're all wall bangable. So any special infected that just wanders around here doesn't have any cover. Also, this respawn closet is insane because by design when making these videos, I like to kill the bots, then open the respawn closets when they appear so that I can kill them again instead of deleting them and then leave the respawn door open. This allows me to respawn them on my terms when needed, but this shed would keep closing the door and respawning teammates on its own. What usually happens is people will juggle gas cans over here and then usually hold out by the bench while chaining the gas cans in front of them. It's definitely the easiest method. We tried this location over here and it wasn't bad, but it was a little claustrophobic when there was both fire and spit at the same time. Kind of cool that you can put fire in either the inside of the church or outside to block the benches. It kind of worked like the benches, but with just a little bit more managing of gas cans and angles. Not bad. It is also possible to just hold out inside the main church room, especially if people are spread out into corners. It can sometimes end in a slippery slope situation where perhaps people get overwhelmed one by one. Sometimes people will also infected boost off of the piano and into this little ledge up here. Oh yes, and you can play the piano, it's very fun.
What?
We also tried holding out in this cramped room and it wasn't that fantastic, but you do still have a pretty wide open view of the main flank that they come from, with some pretty straightforward gas can locations. We did a holdout by the sandbags, and when the majority of the infected are coming from down the hill, it was quite manageable, but whenever they came from behind, it kind of stressed things out a little bit, but I think a normal team can hold out here pretty effectively. An advantage that this event has over others is that it is a delayed start. When you initiate the event, some dialogue will play, and then you can use this time to reposition with your team. This is especially useful for enabling holdouts down the cemetery hill like the ambulance or shed. The ambulance is the more obvious of the 2 holdouts here, and I actually think it's quite good. There is also a strength that you don't need to juggle the house gas cans far at all if you hold out down there. Instead, you can just take the church gas cans and juggle them down the hill, which is easier than juggling them up the hill. Those 2 plus the shed gas can means that you'll chain the 5 gas cans at the main cemetery choke point with the added benefit of a vantage point from the ambulance, making flanks nearly impossible. They'll sometimes come from the trees slightly to the left, but that's about it. I actually think that this is better than the benches. This choke point is also basically the funnel point. Once you go past this point, they'll only ever come to you from one direction. So you could theoretically hold out on the house as well, which I'm sure works fine, but we didn't try it. There's also this shed holdout, which should not work well at all if a single spitter has its way. But when we were holding out here, we were surprised at how effective it was. A big reason for our shed holdout's success is due to the fact that a lot of infected will flank by climbing over the fence right here, which is right in view of this window, so it becomes a very easy collateral situation with minimal effort. When it comes to opening up the safe house door, I feel like I only see the special infected inside being a smoker, hunter, or boomer. I understand if this is like a Left 4 Dead 1 thing, but I do think that there's no reason why it can't also be a charger, spitter, or jockey as well. It's also actually very easy to just open up the door, close it again, and then wallbang it. It's also funny to just pelt it with a grenade launcher from range while someone else opens the door. It is a top 25 Left 4 Dead 2 pastime of mine. I also wouldn't be mad if, for example, if you didn't have a tank in this particular chapter, well, now there's a tank in the safe house. And same thing for the witch, but maybe not so much the witch. In both cases, it would be cheesed by just opening and closing the door. You'd let them auto die, which wouldn't be very interactive. Also, imagine being the last player standing with limping health, an assault rifle, and a melee, and then it's a witch in there, and there happens to not be a way to cheese it for some reason. That'd be pretty lame, but just some food for thought. So looking at this map overall, I think I especially like the stretch of Long Road the most. It's a cool dynamic that I think isn't too long or too short and serves as an appropriate transition from the drains and train yard to the church. If I were to make any changes to this chapter, I think the first thing I'd do is sometimes change the layout of the train yard to sometimes randomize it so that you'd be incentivized to navigate around the left side. I think that this area, while it's a train yard and calls for such a large area, could be livened up a bit to make use of the dead space. At this fork in the road here, I think it would be cool if there sometimes actually were instances where the right side is the correct way to go, with both ways ultimately converging to the house in the center. That'd require a huge overhaul though, but theoretically, if we had the technology, perhaps. Speaking of this house here, theoretically, if sometimes this truck was positioned to be crashing into and blocking the front door, this would, of course, make horde holdouts in this house generally easier, so that would be the trade-off. And in exchange, we'd be getting some uniquely windows, traverse paths, something. But that's ultimately it. I don't see much else opportunity to truly update the map in such a way to promote more unique map pathing. Maybe perhaps there could sometimes be an alarm car along the road there. For the church holdout event, I feel like maybe sometimes just have it so that there isn't like 5 guaranteed gas cans every time. I feel like that's a bit overkill. But of course, no one is forcing you to use the gas cans, and I think an event being at the very end of the chapter warrants something like that to kind of keep the game fun. This game is still ultimately for fun, and it's a part of the game's strength that there's nothing really forcing the players to have to actually do or use anything if they really don't want to. I also think technically you could relocate this ambulance or place another truck in the entrance of this graveyard, make it so that it is a one-way, so people can't run back all the way into the chapter for this event. Also, technically, you could patch this jump boost by making the railing higher here, but that's to incorporate something that I'm going to talk about in the next chapter, which is right now. Alright, so chapter 4, gotta say, if you happen to have the Jaden Smith graffiti tweets mod, this is the room that has the amazing "how can mirrors be real if our eyes aren't real" tweet. That's a 10 out of 10 placement by the mod author, and I want to shake their hand someday. But of course, in vanilla, it's better safe than sorry. But another neat detail about the safe house is that this truly was only the church guy's safe house. There is no other graffiti here. It's a really nice touch. Oh yes, and church guy is voiced by the same guy that voices the TF2 scout. Quick note about the safe house, technically this door on the inside is this door on the outside of chapter 3. I think it would be cool if in chapter 4 you could open this door to just sort of stand there and look out, not for any real particular reason, or maybe it's up here you could pick up like a melee weapon or a grenade launcher or something. Because in this chapter, it's fun to use a sniper to just snipe idols dawdling around while waiting for your team to get ready, but imagine being able to do that with like a guaranteed grenade launcher. So I have to say, after making my common and special infected videos in this little opening area here, I'm especially fond of it now. If you're picking off common infected from the safe house, just be wary that this is where the survivor zombie of the chapter spawns. So just keep an extra eye out, because if you just autopilot and shoot it, that's a potential kit and throwables and stuff that you could be missing out on. And I do sometimes see the survivor zombie spawning a second time later in this chapter, around or during the Gauntlet event. Just remember, for survivor zombies, you can one-hit them with melee weapons, or 2-tap with Desert Eagles. For more nuances of the survivor zombie, you can watch my common infected video. In Left 4 Dead 1, you could hop up onto this fence here, parkour across it, and then jump onto the buses, and that was your skip. But they patched this porting over into Left 4 Dead 2. Though technically you can still jump on this white truck here and that is helpful, you can also still get onto the buses by using the sandbag over here. This is especially helpful for tank fights. There's a continuity error here where in Chapter 3 there's no Humvee, but in Chapter 4 there is a Humvee, and the entire world seems to have completely vanished. Within this open area, the two main things are that there's an auto shotgun spawn in the convenience store office, and funny enough, this is also where I just find myself fighting off a lot of hordes. There's also a respawn closet here in view of the safe house, so that's pretty funny. But also in this little area back here, where there are shelves, this is where the majority of the throwable and temporary health items will spawn, if any. You can of course just jump up onto and hold out from the shelves for hordes in case you thought that we were safe from shelves after the crash course situation. There's also this neat little pocket here. I don't think it serves any real purpose, but it is there. I also like this cheeky little jump through the window in the convenience store that tanks get stuck in all the time. It is unfortunately not possible to parkour onto this roof. They specifically have a big invisible wall over the top of this truck here to prevent it from happening. If you no-clip up, you can walk on the roof, then you can't jump on the truck. There's also this little convenience store over here, which is only in Left 4 Dead 1, but was removed in Left 4 Dead 2 for some reason. I'm a fan of this general area here for no real reason. Also, you can check this room for a deagle spawn. So technically, you can always venture off to the left side here to check the porches of these houses because sometimes things spawn here, like laser sights. But ultimately, this main area here has some rooms that you can check out for throwable and temporary health items. And if a horde spawns on you, there's choke points you can safely hold out in. Technically, you can also jump around these little dumpster areas for high ground in the corners of this parking lot. Yeah, and there technically is a shelf holdout, but whatever. Also not a terrible place to use a pipe bomb for idols to flush them out. This transitional room here is neat. I like it when a horde spawns around here because it's usually pretty easy to just hold the two choke points and then fall back to the respawn closet if you need to. Also behind these bars is a pretty good holdout location. Breaking out into this area, I also dig it as a potential pipe bomb area. Technically, if you look to the right, this is an example of Valve being good at cramming a lot into a smaller space, as on the other side of this truck is the Gauntlet event you run at the end. It is also here that you can check to see if maybe an M60 will spawn later on. I'm also a fan of this general zombie spawning location up here. As always, I just always think that they're neat. There is a little warehouse room to check out here, which sometimes has health and throwables, including bile jars or defibs, and this truck as well is a decent check, I guess. Also another dumpster you can jump on top of for hordes if that's what you want to do. Of course, you can climb up onto this truck for a good vantage point to look around as people check this other room for potential items. I often find a lot of tank fights occur around here. It just seems to happen a fair bit. This truck you climb up on will serve you well during those moments. And you can take this even further by using the truck to jump onto the nearby houses as well. And you can take this a marginal step further by using this car to jump up onto this hedge further down, but that's honestly kind of unnecessary. We've got a neat little spawning area up here. Look at all these windows. Look at this spawning floor. This clearing isn't the worst pipe bomb place in the world. However, it is such a widespread out area that there could even be a number of zombies in far off corners that wouldn't even aggro you to begin with, like by the houses. I love that you traverse this area by jumping up the van. Just such a fun little thing to add in. And technically you can use this sign to jump up on it as well. Up here you can also hang up by this little tent canopy shade flag fabric thing. I don't know what they're called. Someone please just tell me what they're called in the comments. But yeah, you can stand on them and sometimes they're helpful. With this nearby pipe that infected climb up, it's a good spot to hold to cut them off. Once inside, once you're past the final respawn closets before the Gauntlet event, be sure to take an extra second or two to quickly check these cubicles. In general, I see a lot of leftover throwables here. All three, Molotovs, pipe bombs, and especially bile jars, just get left behind here because people just either don't know or don't care to check them. And I think they're sometimes posed too. When you're clearing out this room, you can just jump on top of the bus, and that's a good vantage point, and you can see underneath the awning. Which, by the way, this bus wasn't here in Left 4 Dead 1, and in fact, there also was a minigun here. This was a holdout event in the first title, not a Gauntlet run, which I think is overall a good change that they made. Since a Gauntlet is all corridors anyways, I think it just makes sense that it is a Gauntlet. In general, in my Left 4 Dead 1 fort building days, I loved to delete some props around here to open up these rooms just because I thought they were cool. And I was right, they're still cool to this day. Let that be a lesson to my younger viewers. You're going to have a phase in your life where you think that the things that you liked as a child were actually not cool. But when you get older, you'll realize that it actually was still very much cool the entire time. Just ignore the adult Pokemon scalpers fighting each other. But one thing that is more so funny than cool is that in Left 4 Dead 2, they added these crates here so that people couldn't hold out underneath this ramp anymore. But it's a Gauntlet event now. There's no incentive to be holding out down here anymore. So for this event, you really only need one bile jar. I mean, technically, you don't need to have any bile jar if you've got a combination of strong fundamentals, team coordination, utility usage, or chainsaws. But while 2 bile jars are standard and what will allow you to breeze through this part, 1 bile jar is actually often enough. In a common bile jar event, it will look something like this. You run up the ramp and then there's 1 or 2 special infected down below on your right that are just kind of there for some reason. You may see 1 or 2 commons, but ultimately you won't see anything until after you turn the corner and see this bus, in which now the infected are running towards you. In my ideal playthrough, bile jar number 1, and the only bile jar, will be thrown into this back pocket. The timing of when you release it and when it detonates may still open you up to some common hits to be wary of, but ultimately this back corner should buy you time to turn the corner and get through this alley and then find some high ground. In my opinion, the 2 primary points of stress for this event come from this alley here, as well as up the stairs around this room. The first bile jar will give you the alley, and the second bile jar will be kind of anywhere that's out of the way. Maybe like this bottom room, down these stairs, or simply just over in this corner, and that's it. Or technically you can throw a bile somewhere up here where they like to jump down from anyway, so it delays them up there. Then you might get a rush of zombies from the safe house area, but that's your run. That's the more standard run you'll see, as this chapter does give you a lot of bile jars. When you do throw the bile jar and are running towards the infected, remember to keep hugging the wall so that they're less likely to aggro to you. After that 1 single bile jar into the corner, it will help enable you to hold onto your ammo, so then you've got your full health and your full ammo for these stairs where they like to jump down from the roof above you if that ends up being mandatory. If you have trouble around these stairs, what can happen is maybe you try to start holding out in this room, but there's more than 1 window in this room as well, and it can be quite the uphill battle. I've seen a lot of incaps and have been incapped a lot of times in this room over the years, but that's my approach. Bile jar in this back corner, full ammo reserved for the stairs, then reloaded and ready for the potential rush of infected by the safe house. Now, of course, not everything goes to plan, so let's take a look at some other alternatives and details about this event. First is that it's easy to glitch the bile jars. You can throw one out of bounds over this fence, or you can throw them up into this big room up here and the infected will dance in place. Also, for demonstration purposes, I accidentally detonated it in this tree and I had the same effect. Something interesting about the infected flanking up here is that they have this specific doorway here just for them, maybe more or less mainly for versus. Technically speaking, it also isn't there in Left 4 Dead 1. It's very interesting that this update made it possible here. But this door frame does very much exist. When fighting along, there's also this little dry cleaner area, which sometimes also has items, including another bile jar, which of course is huge. But if you do stop in here, I think you gotta make your little search as fast as humanly possible. But sometimes you may not have the throwables you want anyways, and you end up having to take advantage of the fact that the waves will die down and then respawn over time. So sometimes this laundromat becomes a temporary holdout location. I just don't like any of the geometry in this area as a place to hold out in. I think it is simply just too cramped and leaves no breathing room for yourself. This definitely is the hardest part in the entire campaign, especially if you have no bile jars. I'm also not particularly huge on this room to the right, as cleanly breaking out through the windows can prove to be tricky sometimes. This room down here is an absolute no-no. If you find yourself down here, not only can it be tedious to push out of the actual room, but then you have to subject yourself to going up the staircase, which can be even more tedious. We've touched on bile jars and we've touched on where not to go, but what if you don't have a bile jar? How are you supposed to grind your way towards a safe house in such a high pressure event placed at the very end of a chapter? This is where we break the gauntlet into segments and evaluate from there. Segment 1 is, well, sort of dead and wide open, but there are a couple things to point out. The first is that sometimes, yes, an M60 will spawn here, which can help you a ton in gauntlet events, as the uninterrupted fire time without reloading can prove to be very helpful and help alleviate a lot of pressure. And like I mentioned, you can prematurely check if you got an M60 earlier in the chapter by just looking under this truck. As well, and honestly this might be more for versus, but if you really want to stick it to the infected as early as possible, this doorway up here the infected can use to path around. You can line it up by knowing it's to the right of this vent and just basically kind of around where this pipe is. So you can keep that in mind when trying to line up Molotovs. You can also jump up onto this tent flag shade thing very early on if you want. It's also possible to lob a throwable through this little passage, but there isn't really any great use to this. A bile jar through here would likely just get caught on an infected spawn anyways. And if it does go all the way through, then it will expire before you approach it. Segment 2 is this first alley, and often where your first point of real contact with a common infected will occur. In the survival game mode, standing right here with long range weapons is the go-to strategy. This is also often where I like the first bit of utility to be thrown, whether it's a bile jar, pipe bomb, or Molotov. There's strengths and advantages to trying to hold onto your utility for later versus earlier. It's a debate within itself, but since there's the possibility that other utility can spawn in the middle of this event, specifically the dry cleaners, it is part of why I like to throw them early, especially if you've got an abundance of them, which Death Toll usually has. Usually any throw that leads infected back into this corner to just open up this tight area for you to be able to move forward and then into segment 3. You have to respect this arch up here, however, as there's a whole dedicated infected spawning area which puts infected into segments 2 and 3. And if you've never watched my Dark Carnival Barns video, Just know that forward Molotovs have to be deep so that you can gain space. There aren't any real high ground opportunities in this alley, but you can jump on this garbage to hop onto this yellow pole, and you can use the left dumpster to jump onto this wooden sign. A more tricky but meta and effective bile jar that you can throw is once you get to around segment 2, if you throw that bile jar back towards that common infected little doorway on the roof in segment 1, then that's also a pretty good bile jar and can buy you the entire run as well. The other reason why this bile jar is really effective is because if you are too far away from infected when they are not aggro to the bile jar, they will just despawn and then more will respawn closer to you. This is why, for example, in the passing chapter 2, if you throw a bile jar and then just leave all the infected behind you, more will respawn in front of you later on anyways, even if all 30 of the common infected on the map, which is the maximum amount that can exist, were previously behind you. This bile jar, theoretically, I haven't tested it that much, is strong because when the bile jar does expire, it's actually fairly close to you while still being out of the way. So when it expires, they don't despawn because they're close to the area that they'd be spawning in from anyways. Segment 3 has this back corner, which a lot of utility, even from segment 2, can bleed over into. It's a nice back corner for things like bile jars and pipe bombs for more obvious reasons, but Molotovs especially actually don't need to be that accurate. There's this whole back room here just for infected spawning, and you can just lob a Molotov or bile jar anywhere behind that fence, and it'll get locked in there and do its thing. You can also climb up this dumpster if that's important to you in the moment. It is worth knowing that this jump from dumpster to dumpster is possible too. And of course, everything we touched on with the dry cleaner. You can also jump up onto this little dumpster back here for a tiny bit of a high ground advantage. Segment 4 is, I believe, an important alley. What's tedious about it is that infected don't just come from directly in front, but they can also jump down from these lower roofs. So even if you throw a deep Molotov for some semblance of forward positioning, they can still jump down from above. And there's no good Molotov angle here to try to cheese some of the lower roofs. You will have to hope for a bile jar or pipe bomb to throw. It's not even like you can try a long Molotov lineup from back here because the map simply does not allow over the building throws like this. If you only have one single pipe bomb for the event, this is probably where you throw it. Lower segment 5 also can kind of get flanked from everywhere, but here's a cheeky Molotov. If you get yourself pressed up against this yellow pole, then have your crosshair directly above this sort of line created by the left side of the window pane. Just looking up towards the sky, kind of like this, the Molotov will block the infected spawning area from up top. In a real situation, you won't have as much time to be that methodical with it, but that's a general idea. Unfortunately, you don't need to be that specific with it because of how far the Molotov spreads. As I mentioned, I don't usually like going into the right room that much if it's a grindy type of playthrough, but there are still advantages to holding out in this room with only 2 choke points. There is also an infected boost opportunity here with the dumpsters, but yeah, don't go underneath. It's basically never worth it, but it is neat that you can use these small window holes to not just shoot, but also to throw utility from and under. But there's basically no reason, and breaking out of here can be really hard. Segment 6 is just really hard. I think 5 and 6 are the hardest, but 6 is often where I get incapped, I feel. It can just get really rough with no utility or coordination because it's cramped and there's 3 entry points inside. Plus the staircase area being as narrow as it can possibly get. I would try to not press myself against this corner, against this crate, nor on top of these boxes. The extra geometry does not help that much. In fact, the differing levels of elevation can prove to be awkward when trying to fight off a flood of infected, especially on realism. Upper segment 5, not really much to say. Don't fall down. Just don't fall down and you won't have to relive lower 5 and all of 6 again. Be careful when attempting to jump across when there are infected climbing up because you can't get caught on them and fall. It's also possible to get punched by an infected as you're jumping, so you'll just slow down and drop. Also, you can technically make this jump, but that's very niche. From up here, it may be tempting to throw things like Molotovs or pipe bombs back the way you came, which is fine, but I'm a believer of keeping your throwables down into like this center pit here from here on out because it'll also deal with infected spawning from above and not just from behind. And technically, this Molotov exists. From this side, if you keep your crosshair above this very far vent, you can throw a Molotov over this building and it will ignite this back pit that infected can spawn in by the safe house while keeping the actual safe house open. So if things go the right way, the timing can go like this. Segment 7, honestly, no real comment. Segment 7 is usually just kind of there. Segment 8 is a nice, safer area in general, but ultimately you'll want to sort of peek from the high ground towards the safe house before jumping down into Segment 9. And there's still pipes and flanking opportunities here, so don't get too comfortable. If you are going to perch up on the top of this fence, just accept that if you fall the wrong way, you're running all the way around again. And Segment 9, what else is there to say? It's your last little stretch. You may have no utility options left. Hopefully you jumped down when it wasn't insanely crowded. Be careful that they can spawn in the safe house as well. Good luck. And technically speaking, you can scale up these pipes here for a very cheeky and I think unintended high ground advantage. But also, if you climb to the very top of this and you go idle, the game won't know what to do because it didn't prepare for this moment and it will teleport you all the way back to the starting safe house. Don't do that in a public lobby. To recap this event, sections 2 to 6 certainly have to be the most intense. A bile jar in this back corner of 3 can potentially buy you the whole run. Afterwards, a second bile jar in this pit of 5 can even further seal the deal. And this is what a standard run looks like. This whole pit is where a ton of utility will be seen anyways, from segment 4 and beyond. This pipe bomb in segment 3 can also buy you segments 2 and 3. I would consider these the core utility throws of the holdout event, with everything else being more improvised. There is also our meta bile jar up here if you can throw it. And then of course the cheekier Molotov throws we went over, including the pit next to the safe house, the bridge up in the roof for infected, and over the fence in segment 3. Do not forget the potential M60 spawn by the truck, and while the chainsaw is a controversial melee weapon, I think at the end of the day, it is a situational item, and this is the situation. When you do get to the safe house, you may notice the graffiti over here mentions Evacuation Outpost Echo, which is to some extent where the survivors are supposed to be escorted to after being picked up by the military at the end of Blood Harvest, although they do end up in the Millhaven military base first instead for processing, with the intention of being transferred to Echo afterwards. So Chapter 4 in review is neat because really, it primarily revolves around 2 streets, but you find yourself weaving in and out of the buildings a lot. I think that's pretty neat. If I were to make a suggestion for an alternative path option, I think it would be cool to sometimes, from this first parking lot, what if the way through was actually through this closet over here sometimes? Could promote more people exploring this room in general. But that's actually my only idea, really, without closing this gap or doing something to try to negotiate players more towards these back warehouses as the primary way forward. And I think that simply just wouldn't work. All right, our final chapter, Chapter 5. This opening area, of course, I think the opening rooms are worth checking out. But yes, there is a neat little parkour opportunity here to hop up into this big hidey hole, which usually doesn't actually have any major advantages, not already being granted to you by the doorway choke point, or the safe house door behind you for that matter. But in my playthroughs on stream for this video, I did at some point have a tank fight, and it was this ledge that helped me be able to kite him and not get backed into a corner, so there's that. This first opening area is a decent pipe bomb opportunity if you still have one. It won't guaranteed kill all of the idle infected, but it will pull them out at least, I guess. Theoretically, you can just walk across the street and that's all fine and cool. If you want to maximize your health economy and what have you, stay against the wall before directly crossing the street into the house. Also, if you look up in this window, that is actually a car. That is not random furniture pressed up against the window of this building. That is just a picture of a car. And this picture of a car is also on the back of the building too. I don't know why this is here. If anyone from Valve sees this, please. Why is there a car? There shouldn't be a car up here. Also over here, it's insane how much extra map exists just because of versus implications, or even the possibility of a survivor can stand here, so we gotta make some decoration. I think this house is completely worth ransacking. There's often pills in this left bathroom here, and throwables cheekily hiding to the right just next to the front door. This house is great for holding out in. It is not uncommon for a horde to spawn around here too. If you're ever in like this backyard area when a horde spawns, I think just running back inside is the way to go so you can watch both choke points and go from there. There's technically some exploration to be had in the next backyard, but I don't think I ever really see anything spawn here. I think this area is just more for general world building and not much else. Also from here, you can see this very niche hotel sign, which is impossible to see from other angles. Did you know there's a hotel? There's a hotel. Big wide open area, and the characters will even say something like, "Careful, this is wide open." But honestly, this area is so wide open that if anything does spawn on you, you've got more than enough space to relocate and thin out numbers from afar. On the far left side, you can actually walk into this little dip over here. I didn't know that prior to making this video. And on the right side, it's the same thing. There's just a lot of dead space here. You can technically walk around if you feel like blinding yourself in some trees. But also this truck on the other side of the fence here looks like the truck at the beginning of The Last Stand. So of course I had to message JaiZ, and it turns out it is the truck from The Last Stand. It was added here after The Last Stand update, but it is not here in Left 4 Dead 1. And JaiZ also said that the idea was that The Last Stand branches off from this death toll map. Something about the survivors didn't think to signal for a boat and instead decided to drive away with the pickup. But of course this is just non-canon, but it's pretty neat. Also, I know the idea is to make it look like leaves and branches are blowing in the wind, but man, does this tree look weird as heck. This does not look like a tree blowing up in the wind because this looks like a demon. This is a demon tree. If you're free looking around, you can see there's some collision on these tall poles for some reason. Very neat. And throws me off when you consider all the other times something in the game wouldn't have collision. One last check in this little building for items before venturing off into our riverside holdout, but also be sure to check behind it for a gas can if that's important to you. There is caution to be exercised here moving up towards the flame barrel because infected can come in through trees as well as the cliffs. The first tree on the left especially is a bit diabolical. Also, you can technically walk forwards by just going up the hill to the right here. Once in the general finale area, there are 2 spots to search, and there's a small shack which can have some health and throwables, and usually an axe. As well as this main central sort of camper looking outside shelter. I'll just call it a shelter. But usually throwables and health items around this shelter as well. If you no clip way out here, you'll see this floating box, which I think is where they warp the survivors to for the ending boat animation. It's also probably a pretty good holdout location if you can get to and from it. So surveying this land for possible holdout locations, we've got this shack, shelter, this boat dock, this big boathouse, as well as a lot of trees and rocks. The docks, I think, is one of the most consistent. Its only downsides really being away from the ammo spawns. The stretch of dock you have to run up and down unless you want to get slowed down by water, and the occasional charger insta-kill. But other than that, it's just got really good vision with the gas can locations being quite obvious. Just got to get out before the tank gets too close. The second one, and the more common one, is the 2-and-2 holdout on the back of the boathouse dock, where you've got 2 people in one corner and 2 people in the other corner. This creates crossfire opportunities in the center, and then the infected just funneling into people's crosshairs because they can't flank from behind or the sides. It's also right next to all the utilities, and it's very easy to disperse and regroup on before and after tank fights. On the inside of the house in Left 4 Dead 1, you could do these closet holdouts, but in Left 4 Dead 2, you can see that they have opted for a more open concept. Left 4 Dead 1 also had this nice little window, which is now a breakable wall. And in Left 4 Dead 2, they removed this table. Why did they remove this table? I liked this table. Last stand update should have re-added the table. On the second floor, they still had this shelf, but you weren't able to jump up onto it. But I guess no table is the trade-off because in Left 4 Dead 1, like, you really couldn't go up onto the shelf, like, at all. I tried to no-clip above it, and when I got out, it just pushed me away from it. But in Left 4 Dead 2, you can jump up no problem. So a fun fact about this holdout is you can't start the event and then run back all the way to the safe house. Unlike other finale maps, there is no one-way drop separating this holdout from the rest of the chapter, but you'll notice that after the event starts, a big pileup of rocks now magically forms back here, which you can't cross. We tried to position ourselves in such a way that allowed us to see these spawn into existence, but if someone is standing in a spot that has vision of this area, then the event simply can't start because all living survivors must be closer to the radio. So a completely silent avalanche happens after you radio for help. But you know what? I think some land shaking and some loud noises at least could give some context as to why a huge horde and tanks are being drawn to the docks anyways. Because right now, the huge loud noise that kickstarts all of this is John Slater saying, "All right, we are on our way." But nothing is stopping you from still running over here and holding out against this rock anyways, which is what we did, and it went quite well actually. They don't really consider this, so infected only funnel from the front. The biggest disadvantage easily has to be the fact that it's so far from all the weapons and health items. If you really want, you can cheat forward to be closer to the fire barrel instead, and it was the same thing. They only really came from the front. We experimented a lot with the different rocks. They were all pretty fine and mostly have the same notes. The main thing is chargers and spitters, but ultimately there's usually one main area they come from and you'll usually have pretty decent visibility. The first ones we tried were off to the west here in this far corner, which is the gameplay you just saw. And then we tried a rock closer to the shelter, which lent itself about the same amount of visibility, but the different angles they could come from, including the shelter, were just a tiny bit more. We tried to hold out within the actual shelter itself, and I didn't really like this one as much. It's possible, though you have to be a bit more proactive and more alert. I can see how the infected can really swarm and take over this one. We also experimented with this more wide open area actually, and surprisingly it wasn't bad because you can see quite a ways away with most angles. So you could leverage long range weapons, and then the shorter range weapons had a place too with the one patch of trees. This rock next to the shelter was definitely one of the highest of grounds, even being about the same height as the shelter's roof. This of course lends itself to a bit more of a problem with the charger compared to other places. And while one side had great visibility, the others did have a fair amount of trees that the infected could weave through. Then we've also got this rock next to the shack, and honestly, I was surprised by this one. The geometry of the rock basically made most infected choose to run up and around instead of climb up. And because of the rock's placement in conjunction to the ground levels, you had pretty decent visibility for the most part. Inside the shack, of course, can be a little bit claustrophobic, but you do also have the dresser to fall back onto for high ground should you need. not amazing, but I think not terrible either. We also had this big rock to the opposite side of the shack, and I really liked this one. They basically never came from behind and would often choose to run around the shack instead of through. So it's like they'd really only come from one of two flanks, and on the right side, you could sometimes see them from quite far. It's pretty crazy to me how, despite so many trees in this area, since a lot of them don't have leaves, it's actually not reducing your visibility by that much. And the terrain is so uneven that there's a lot of opportunities to just jump up on these rocks and be able to see decently far. We circled back to this rock across from the dock, and wouldn't you know it, most of the infected came from areas where you have quite a bit of time to react to them. Though there are some nearby evergreens that make it just a little bit sketchy on some angles. There's also this rock over here that you could jump up on in the first title, and this holdout is very good. So good in fact that it's patched out in Left 4 Dead 2 with an invisible wall. And then it's funny that they also patched this other big rock in front of it, which also can't be climbed up. Guess this is just such a really powerful corner. And that actually gave me an idea, so I tested it and it worked pretty decently. There is also this rock over here in Left 4 Dead 1, but in Left 4 Dead 2 they made it taller so you can't jump on it anymore. And in Left 4 Dead 1 you were also able to hop up onto this rock, but they knew that we would be up to our dastardly tricks and blocked this other water rock from the very get-go. Now of course the minigun holdout here isn't the greatest of spots for the minigun user themselves, but the high ground certainly helps everyone else defend the user. There can be a lot that come from below though, and the wall that breaks down might help it become a little bit more cramped. But there's usually room for flexibility. I remember some runs where someone was actually just watching down the stairs outside, or someone else stayed on the roof above the front door. You can be a little bit flexible with this. Including the second floor in general, I've seen some holdouts where people just chill on the shelves. I didn't experiment with the first floor, and to be honest, I didn't really want to humor it, especially when they can come from up the stairs and there's no safe space to stand looking upwards because that wall just breaks down. When kiting tanks on this map, I think it's best to try to lure them into this outdoor area between the main boathouse and the shelter. Not only is this just a patch of wide open area, but it's also in view of the minigun. This is possible on other maps too, but I especially love that if you yeet a throwable into the air before hopping on the boat, you can see it traveling when the camera cuts. So that's chapter 5. Pretty decent little map. I think if I wanted to shake it up a little bit, I wonder about perhaps making it so that more than one house is modeled on the inside, but only one house at a time is actually the one that you path through. I also think, yeah, maybe make it so that you can hear and feel that avalanche, maybe see it too. But if animating it is a concern, just continue to make it so that the starting area makes it impossible for people to ever be in position to see that happen. It's just funny that the horde triggers over the sound of nothing. I'd also maybe like to see people be able to jump up on this big rock again, but I definitely get if that's just too strong. And that's what I've got for Death Toll. I hope you liked it. I certainly really enjoyed making this one. And of course, by all means, let me know in the comments or in my Discord if I've missed a strategy, fact, or detail about this campaign you like so we can revisit it in our recap video, which will come out when all of these are finished. As per usual, we'll wrap up this campaign breakdown with a collection of my favorite memories from Death Toll over the years. But two quick things, which I said at the beginning. The first is that I've done some extensive scheduling on my end, and this is more or less the proposed upload schedule for the rest of 2025. But just remember, we are operating on norm time. But we'll see how consistent it'll be. Of course, as this updates or doesn't update, the Discord server is always the first to know. The second is, I said I'd talk about why Death Toll is my favorite campaign. It's a very sentimental reason. It's not one that even ties to gameplay, though I do like that this campaign feels like it's got a little bit of everything. But you know how with a graphic like this, it shows how one's life is a series of choices and events, and how one decision can change your whole life and trajectory? Well, during Left 4 Dead 1, when I was in grade 7, on a random day, I queued up for a campaign. I can't remember if I chose Death Toll specifically or if it was a quick match, but I was in a Death Toll campaign with a guy initialed S. And S was around my age, very funny, and we had a blast. So we kept playing as the days went on, then eventually we discovered fort building. So him and I would build forts. Then I would make some fort videos, which the friend initialed P would discover on YouTube and add me so that he can learn how to do it too. And he became one of my best friends. Together, me, S, and P would meet J. J would teach us so many other cool things about fort building, but J would also introduce us to Counter-Strike Source Jailbreak, which myself and P would get obsessed with. J sadly also hasn't logged in for 4 years, so I hope he's okay. Through Counter-Strike Source Jailbreak, we met this one clan initialed H, and then part of that clan would break off and form a new clan initialed D, myself included. D became a huge part of my gaming and social life, and they introduced me to League of Legends. When that original hype came out, this led to me discovering League's esports scene, and then later Overwatch and their esports scene when that launched, and then discovering that Counter-Strike's esports scene is amazing as well. Somewhere around here, I started to record, clip, and highlight all of my video game clips to make montages out of. When I went to school, I very quickly sought out and got picked up by my college's esports department, where I went to town on videographer work for them, effectively doing for them what I do for myself. I honed a ton of media work here, but also was very exposed to like 9 other different esports titles, and it helped me analyze how all game titles are similar, not just how they're all different. This extra work not just helped me hone my skills for my program, but to later get hired post-graduation and start this channel. The ripple effect of many things of my life, from the best friends I've made who I still talk to this day, to my love for esports, and how my college and post-college life panned out, and you even watching this video right now, all stemmed because one day I randomly decided to hop into a death toll campaign. I will never not love this campaign, and no one can convince me that it isn't the best. Because it is. Death toll is the best, forever and always. And a big thank you to Boss Kicks for helping me with the holdout testing. As always, it was a great time, and thank you to Schmorgus who also appeared for a little bit. I hope your hospital visit goes well. Everyone remember to subscribe to help support Schmorgus so that he can go back to accidentally jumping off ledges again. Alright, here's my favorite death toll memories caught on tape. Thanks again for tuning in. Peace.
Jeez. Oh my god. Holy shit. Breaking down the door is cheating.
You're shooting at me just now.
Oh, hell yeah.
Oh yeah, that was. Oh shit.
Are you going to live? Oh my god.
Oh.
I am very separated.
Hey, Ham, can you do me a favor?
Yeet! Nice. Alright, nice. Just an average day of Left 4 Dead 2 with you guys. Sideways? He's lying down sideways. Oh shit. Oh fuck. Alright, we're close the door on these guys. Oh my goodness. Please stand back. Jeez. My dudes, come on now. Whoop. Let me back in!
Well, you getting tired, Francis? Tell you what, I'll go find us a boat, and then I'll come back and pick you up and carry you there. And I'm going.
Hey, Francis. Peter's here.
Francis, that's a car. And it's on fire.
Phil's here.
Get punched into the fire engine.
Wow. Get punched into the fire, idiot.
First be real if our eyes aren't real.
Bill! Oh my god, Bill! Bill opened the door!
Are kicking ass.
Look out!
That sounds like a witch.
Okay, I'm throwing this too.
I'm down!
Oh, watch this.
Fine.
Oh shit. Oh.
So Norm. So Norm.
Oh, where I'm helping from here. Wait, what's this pipe on? Oh no. Oh.
Oh, just got TP. Relax.
That explosion behind the boat.
Okay, I'm opening the door.
What?
Incoming!
Okay, Norm, now I'm gonna open the door for you. Go, go, go.
Guys,
The hell? There's nothing in here.
gonna make.
What is going on with my music?
Alright guys, trek fort's done.
Okay.
I'm gonna try to piss him off beforehand.
Weapons here.
I got him.
I heard that! I'm the one who decides who. Better safe than sorry. Nobody writes for free. Better served! Come and get it!
It's all on you, Lewis. I've got one med kit and I've got one Molotov. We get through this horde.
I need a hand, people.
Okay,
Okay, jeez.
I'm here.